All right, welcome to round two of HH Insurance Claims Podcast. If you saw the first one, we did it on homeowners insurance claims, and today is all about boat insurance. So I am Jake Holehouse, the CEO and founder of HH Insurance, and with me we have Landon Cassidy. Landon is our VP of Marine Insurance, where he leads a team dedicated to just writing boat insurance, and we do an amazing job at it. And so today we are going to talk about what happens pre-hurricane, what happens post-hurricane, what hurricane plans look like, and just really a conversation to help insureds understand their policies better. So the one legal disclaimer just to cover is this is not specific policy advice. This is general guidance about general claims. So this is not being used as a guide to exactly how a claim goes or anything along those lines. So just, please know that this is a generalized overview of Florida marine insurance. So Landon, we'll get started with, first one is, most boat owners have no idea that their policy has hurricane requirements. Can you explain what that typically looks like?
Yeah, definitely. So it really depends on the type of boat or value of the boat. Some policies, generally speaking, $350,000 in value of the boat, sometimes up to $500,000. Below that, oftentimes the policy is not going to have a hurricane haul requirement or no hurricane plan requirement. Above that value, as you start to get higher value boats, they're typically going to have some sort of a haul out requirement or a written plan that has to be on file with the carrier. Some carriers may require just a written plan, no specifics of hauling out or moving the boat. They just want to know what's going to happen with the boat. Some carriers may require an actual haul out plan to 10, 15, 20 miles inland or inside of a Cat 4 or 5 rated warehouse. I really describe insurance, the price of insurance, oftentimes as the correlated to risk. So when an insured submits a hurricane plan that looks really good, that really has a strong haul-out plan to it, a lot of times we can take that back to the carrier and show the carrier, hey, look, this is the hurricane plan, and sometimes we can get some additional rate credits for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And with some policies, there's actually an exclusion if that plan is not followed.
Yeah, some people really need to make sure they know about that because that can come back to haunt them. On very, very certain policies, not many, but there are some out there that have it pretty specifically worded in the policy that if this hurricane plan that you have signed to, that you said is going to happen, if that doesn't happen, then we're not going to cover anything. So definitely something really important to know about.
Yeah, I know, what was it during Hurricane Helene, we had a customer call us and he was out of the country, but he did have a hurricane plan. And so, I think the key to those plans is making sure that you also have alternates, right? Because the plan doesn't say if you're out of the country, hey, you don't have to follow this plan anymore. The plan is the plan. And so, if you need somebody else to help you with it, it's great to have backup.
And the plan's got to be realistic too. If you're buying a 35-foot center console boat and you're not buying a trailer and you've said on your plan, hey, I'm going to haul my boat 25 miles inland and you have no idea where you're going to take it to, how you're going to get it there, you don't even have a truck. That plan is not realistic and you're kind of walking yourself into a trap if you're overarching or overstepping on a hurricane plan there.
Yeah, and a lot of times, we've had many insureds use outside vendors that can execute the plan. They do it at like a set fee, and basically it reserves a spot.
Yeah, that's a great point. And something I recommend to clients that don't have the ability, don't have a truck, don't have a trailer, they don't even want to deal with it sometimes too. They can hire a third party to actually execute that hurricane plan for them. And it's typically like a written contract that's renewed on a yearly basis that guarantees them a spot or the availability to get that boat moved.
Yeah. I know personally I did that. And what's really nice about that plan is you actually get free trailer storage. So instead of paying for trailer storage, I just pay for the plan, right?
Kill two birds. There are two birds with one stone. There you go.
Yeah. So, one of the other things is on these plans, does it change based on where the boat's stored? So let's just say somebody has it in, high and dry, rated or non-rated building, compared to somebody on a lift, compared to somebody on a trailer that's already inland.
Yeah, definitely. So really, if you have the boat inside of a hurricane-rated building already, like a dry stack facility, you're likely not going to need to move that boat. If you've got it inland and on a trailer, you won't have to move it either. It's really depends on where the boat's located, more so a proximity to coast, and if it's inside or outside are kind of your main factors there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the other big things with a policy in Florida, and really this would kind of go for any coastal state, is that there's typically 2 deductibles in the policy. Let's talk about those 2 deductibles and how they, what are both of them and what's kind of the typical range?
Definitely. You kind of have, you even can have more than 2 sometimes, but generally speaking, you have a whole deductible. Think about your typical fire, collision, boat falls off the trailer, falls off a forklift, falls off the lift, whatever it may be. We kind of call that your whole deductible. And then you also have a separate named storm deductible or hurricane deductible. That's typically that separate hurricane deductible is going to apply to any sort of a named storm. So generally speaking, if you have like an afternoon thunderstorm that comes through and damages your boat when it's tied up to a dock, that's typically your whole deductible. But if you've got a named storm, a tropical storm Andy or whatever it may be, or Hurricane Idalia comes through, that's going to be covered under your named storm deductible, which is typically a percentage basis and typically higher than your whole deductible. In Florida, I've seen anywhere from a 5% to a 50% named storm. And again, you can use those deductibles to kind of control your rate. Again, price of insurance correlates to risk. And so as you, the insured, take on a higher deductible, if you wanted to increase your named storm from like a 10% up to a 25%, you'd likely see a pretty big discount or rate savings on your insurance because you're taking on more of the risk, not the insurance company at that point.
Yeah, and I think one of the common misconceptions within that percentage is it's a percentage of boat value.
Yeah.
It's not a percentage of claim value.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so when we say 25% on $1 million boat, that doesn't mean if you have a $100,000 claim, it's $25,000.
Yeah, it's $250,000.
$250,000. And so that can turn into a very large number very fast. And so that's where it kind of gets into that art and science of insurance, right? It's that balancing act between premium rate and amount of risk taken. But when you get into a deductible of that size, that can be a catastrophic event.
Definitely. It could definitely change. You might not be going out on the boat for a while. If you've got a $250,000 deductible, you got to pay first before you can get your boat repaired. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, somebody hasn't looked at their policy in a few years. What is one thing they need to look at, before hurricane season?
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride, I would say. The market ebbs and flows and shifts constantly. Hurricane Ian, I would say, kind of was the big shift in the market. Before Hurricane Ian, it was kind of smooth sailing. Policies were pretty easy to come by. Hurricane Ian hit, and not many of the carriers were ready for what might have happened there in the sense of hurricane deductibles, hurricane plans. So after Ian, it became very much so a hard market, very hard to get hurricane insurance on boats, mandatory haul outs, having to go to a Lloyd's of London overseas type carrier. And so, if somebody purchased their policy in 22, 23, even 24, they might have had to purchase a less than ideal policy because the market was really tough at that time. And so if they haven't looked at it in a couple of years, it really comes down to let's shop it and see what other carriers may be out there that may have a better deductible, lower deductible, less requirements on a named storm, but more so just knowing what kind of a hurricane plan warranty you may have. If you bought that policy in 22, 23, then you may have a haul-out warranty on there that we need to make sure you're able to follow.
Yeah, so really, 3 things that I hear in that, right? So Hurricane Ian, 2022, and so a lot's changed since then.
Yep.
Number 2, if somebody is an HH customer and they have one of those type of policies, one thing that your team does is proactively look at those renewals and see if we can, move somebody into a more ideal, market, lower deductibles, lower prices. I mean, I think, last month alone, I believe your team proactively cut premiums by over $200,000 for customers.
Yeah.
And so that is a major add-on of somebody working with your team.
We've had a lot increase in capacity. We can insure higher value boats. We can insure them a lot easier right now. The market as a whole has shifted in a much better direction for the insured. And so, proactively, every renewal, we're able to shop those policies and then sometimes move it into a better program.
Yeah. And I think, another thing is, in 2023, it might have been 5 times the rate to carry wind coverage versus going, excluding wind. Today, it's more like 50% to double the rate. And so, if you are somebody that purchased X wind, or when we say X wind, meaning excluding wind coverage, because the rates were unaffordable a couple years ago, now is the year to relook at that.
Definitely, and I have that conversation a lot of the times with people that have X-Wind policies, and they're willing to look at a high named storm deductible. They're comfortable taking a 10, 20, 40% named storm deductible. They just want some coverage on the back end if that boat's a total loss, and that's where we as an agent can really kind of come in and tweak the policy to meet the needs or the wishes of the insured. Yeah,
absolutely. So shifting gears a little bit to hurricane haul-outs. So one thing that I think a lot of people may not know about within their policy is that some policies have a haul-out reimbursement.
Yeah.
What is it, and how does that work?
Yeah, a really cool feature. A lot of policies, and each policy kind of breaks it down and looks at it differently. Some will cover dollar for dollar. Some will cover 50% of your expense. Some are a flat number. So you got to really make sure you look at your policy. But in general speaking, if you have your boat on a lift, let's say behind your house, and there is a hurricane coming, and you call a local marina, hey marina, I want to bring my boat over to you to have it hauled out, put up on the hard for this upcoming storm. As long as the hurricane watch or warning is in your area where your boat is at physically, and you pay somebody on a professional manner, you can't just charge yourself back for it. But you call a marina or a boat hauler or a transport company to move the boat, take some sort of proactive action for that boat, the carrier will actually reimburse you for a lot of that expense. Because think about the carrier doesn't want to have to pay out a total loss. They're encouraging you to actually use this hurricane haul-out reimbursement. And the carriers don't look at it as a red eye or ding on your record. They want you to use this, so they don't even count those kind of claims towards, hey, have you had any claims in the past 5 years? So it's really encouraged coverage to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the clarifications on there is that, so when you have those marina contracts, right, some marinas will charge like a $1,500 annual fee, and then they'll charge you $1,000 per haul out.
Correct.
The $1,500 typically is not covered in the policy, but that $1,000 per use, that's covered. I would say on average, most it's typically a 50-50, but there are a couple that do that 100% reimbursement.
Yeah, the trigger there is the hurricane watch or warning. So exactly, an annual contract, there's no hurricane this year, nothing like that, they're not going to cover that. But if there's a hurricane watch or warning in your area, that coverage is then triggered. And yeah, we even have some carriers that actually pay $10,000, dollar for dollar match for a hurricane haul-out program. And so for a bigger boat, that can go a long ways, actually. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's walk through how that reimbursement process actually works. Do they start with calling the carrier and asking the carrier to coordinate the haul out, or is that something they do and then get a reimbursement?
I wish that'd be easy, but and it's something that the client has to arrange and actually has to execute, and the carrier would reimburse them on the back end. You're welcome to give us as your agent a call and say, hey, I'm looking at having this marina haul my boat out, or hey, I'm looking at this haul out contract with this transport company. How would my policy react if I had to use that? We can definitely tell you, hey, it would cover X, Y, and Z. But yes, they would actually have to go through that process. The client would have to pay the marina, pay the transport company, keep that receipt. And then once the dust settles from the hurricane, they can send that receipt to the carrier and get reimbursed on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so really, requirement on that is that they, one, have to have the coverage. So not every policy has it, but I would say most do. And then number two is that hurricane watch or warning. So it's not done as, hey, it has to be a category 3 or greater, storm. Yeah. But it's when NOAA issues a county level hurricane watch or warning. And, even if the hurricane never comes, right? I remember, what was it? Was it Hurricane Helene, or it might have been Ian? There's somebody
Ian. I think it was Ian when everybody was hauling out in Tampa Bay and the hurricane never even hit. Yeah.
And even in, West Palm Beach, I remember a claim where, somebody submitted for that and they were able to get it reimbursed because of that proactive measure.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you think about Helene and Milton, there's a hurricane watch on pretty much all of Florida. So it's pretty easy for that coverage to be triggered.
Is there anything that could cause a haul-out reimbursement to get denied that most people would expect to be covered?
Yeah, if it's a under the table kind of deal, like if you call your neighbor Joe and say, "Hey Joe, can you go haul my boat out?" You live out of state. You call your neighbor Joe and have Joe haul the boat out, and Joe's just a neighbor and a friend, and it's not an actual professional company that does this for a living. The carrier's not going to pay for neighbor Joe to go move the boat. But it's got to be a legit company. The carrier wants to pay this out. So if it's on the up and up, they'll definitely pay it. But yeah, using an unlicensed or under the table kind of deal, they're not going to help out and pay for that now.
Yeah, and I think the other is it's got to be a reasonable expense.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
It's if you try to submit it at 20,000 because you think you have 20,000 and they moved it 2 miles, that might be considered unreasonable,
Correct,
right? And so it's got to be within that kind of market average of expense.
Definitely, yeah.
So continuing on hurricane plans, from the insurance side, we've seen hurricane plans that work and we've seen hurricane plans that don't work. Let's start with what works. What does a solid hurricane plan actually look like in practice?
Yeah, definitely. So many people, think that their boat's going to be fine on a lift. And I think as we saw with Helene and Milton, that was clearly not the case. If you got a boat that's on a lift and somehow the floodwater picks that boat up, and then as the boat moves around and the wind and the waves and the boat kind of comes back on the lift and all of a sudden the water recedes and the boat ends up with its butt end in the sand and it's sitting upside down like this. So really the priority that a lot of the carriers want to see is getting the boat off the lift. The damage from the lift can be catastrophic. So getting the boat off the lift, ideally putting it on a trailer and moving it inland. So I'd say really moving it inland. The farther it is away from the flood zone, from the bigger islands, the better. Getting it off the lift, and then a solid hurricane plan has got to be realistic. Like I said, if it's something that you don't actually have the ability to execute, there's no reason to put that down and hope and pray that can happen. It's got to be something that's easy to execute. You have to have your trailer, have your truck, and know how to get that boat moved if that's something you're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so common failures. What do we see people maybe not do that they said they were going to do and what happens from a claim perspective?
Yeah, a lot of people that have secondary residences that may not live near the boat and say, hey, if there's a hurricane coming, even though I live in Alabama, I'm going to make my way down to Florida and move that boat. Well, by the time they actually make their way down to Florida, it's too late. The storm's already coming or the bridge is already closed. So having a secondary residence, it can be hard to actually execute a hurricane plan. I'd say it's probably one of the most common ones.
And I think the other one is, when a hurricane's coming, you also have to be realistic that you're potentially trying to evacuate, right? If the boat's on a lift at your house, statistically speaking, you probably live in a high hazard flood zone and you might be in a mandatory evacuation area. And so you're also thinking about, man, I've got to get my family 100 miles away as well. It's really hard to go grab the boat. And so I think that's where sometimes those professional services, as much as it is, man, I already have an F-250, I can do this myself. You now have to get a friend to meet you at the boat ramp, somebody to help you with it. And at the same time, you're saying, oh my gosh, I need to drive my kids out of town as fast as I can. I think that's where we've seen some people take on a lot of stress with hurricane plans. Definitely,
and especially if they don't start early. If the hurricane's a week out, you've got time to run to the boat ramp and grab the boat and move it. The hurricane's 2 days out. You've got other priorities, not the boat that you're focusing on. Yeah.
So is there a story, without naming names, where someone's preparation made a real difference in how their claim turned out?
Yeah, a lot of the larger yachts we insure can be quite difficult to obviously haul out or trailer. A 50, 60-foot Viking, you're not going to just be able to put that up on a trailer and move it. So a lot of those larger yachts that may have been, in direct path of the hurricane, the captains of those yachts or the owners of those larger yachts having a secured location for the boat on the east coast of Florida as opposed to the west. If the boat is in Tampa Bay, having a location where they can run the boat around the bottom of Florida and up over the east coast, or maybe up in the Panhandle and get it away. I would say planning ahead for a larger yacht like that is definitely something that's super helpful. And then hauling out, man. I live in St. Pete. Saw so many boats after Helene, specifically in St. Pete, that were upside down. I remember some of my family's houses where the boats are literally just sitting up against the seawall. And obviously it's a terrible thing. Your boat's damaged. You got a claim. But then slowly things start to return back to normal. A couple months goes by. Those guys still don't have boats.
Yeah.
They're still working through the process of a claim. We're trying to get that boat fixed, and all of a sudden you've got thousands of boats trying to get fixed. You're not going to be back on that boat for a long time. And so, being able to move the boat inland can actually save you a good bit of fishing time too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the ones that we saw in there is, in Helene, it was a lot of the boats that didn't have hurricane plans, right? That, typically more like the $100,000 pontoon boat.
Yeah.
But the high dollar boats, they executed hurricane plans, they didn't have damage.
Yeah.
You compare that to Ian in 2022, so just 2 years earlier, where really nobody executed hurricane plans and you just saw boats stacked up across Fort Myers of all sizes. And so, while Helene was a major event specifically for the west coast of Florida, from a boat claim perspective, it was not nearly as bad as Ian was, yet, could have been similar.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
Next one on here is talking about when the storm is coming. So, when a storm is named and tracking towards Florida, what should an HH insurance policyholder be doing immediately from an insurance standpoint?
Yeah, I think one, it's know what their hurricane requirements are, know what they have to do in the event of a hurricane. And then, obviously being able to execute that plan and being ready to execute that plan. And just be able to move quickly on it, move ahead of time. Don't wait till the last second. Get that done as soon as possible. And if you do see a storm is, projected to hit your area, give your agent a call. Call us at HH and say, hey, what are my hurricane plan requirements? Would my policy reimburse me? What's my deductible? Call us before. We want to help you prepare. We don't want to be getting called after and say, well, shoot, why didn't I know about this?
Yeah.
Reach out to us. We're happy to discuss that with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other that I would add in there is, if you're trying to make policy adjustments, when the storm is coming is too late.
Man.
I remember, was it, I think Helene or was it either Helene or Ian coming? And we had it insured with a 42-foot yellowfin.
Yep.
And we're in the eye of the storm, and he's saying, hey, the value of my boat went up. I just forgot to adjust coverage.
Exactly.
Can I add $200,000 because of my repower?
Yep.
And at that point, it's a little too late. Yeah.
That's a great point, too. A lot of when you have a watch or warning that's in the area where your boat is at, a lot of the carriers will actually turn off the ability to make a coverage change or bind a new policy. So yeah, if your renewal's right in the middle of hurricane season, you want to make sure that renewal's renewed and good to go. And then, we had so many clients try and call at the last second and say, hey, increase my coverage, add a hurricane, lower my deductible. It's like, no, it's kind of too late. The hurricane's already about to be here.
Yeah. I know on the renewals, if you have a renewal, you can still renew that policy.
Mm-hmm. Correct, yeah.
But if we're doing a proactive rewrite for you, like we talked about of, saving over $200,000 last month, if we're doing that and we're moving to a different carrier, that carrier might be frozen. So as much as I'll call you next week works, when we're between June and November, we hope that next week works,
yes.
but we have seen many that ended up renewing at higher rates because they took too long to call back.
Correct. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So let's talk about, what happens when we actually file the hurricane claim. So, let's just say that we have damage, right? What does the typical claim look like and kind of what are the steps on that?
Yeah, I think really the first step is documentation. Even before the hurricane comes, a lot of clients were asking, hey, what should I do? Videotape your boat, take a picture of your boat. Make sure you can see what kind of electronics you have, what kind of engines you have, the condition of your boat before the storm. Take some pictures and videos as evidence of your boat, show up before the loss may occur. And then if there is a loss, document, take pictures, take videos. That's the easiest way to get some sort of proof going. And then mitigate. If your boat is, after the hurricane actively sinking, we'll try and make it stop sinking. Yeah. Take some sort of action to mitigate that damage. It's going to make things a lot easier for you, less damage ideally, and the carrier is going to be able to work with you a lot quicker on that. And then filing the claim, actually calling that into the carrier and letting them know what has happened. And sometimes you may actually have to take proactive steps before you call that carrier to try and mitigate some of that damage.
Yeah, and I think, when it comes to filing the claim, two things that I always throw in there to people is, one, most carriers have an online claim portal at this point,
Yep.
or they have an app.
Yep.
Try to find either one of those because it is significantly faster to get in the queue via a portal than it is to sit on hold when thousands of others are also calling.
Yeah, we saw that from Helene and Milton firsthand, where all day our phone was ringing off the hook with claims, and yeah, it's a lot quicker. Just go online and say submit a claim, and most carriers have an app even at this point, so you can just hit a button.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the second one is you also have to have your policy information, right? And so I know, in Helene, we had thousands of calls coming in and we only had 5 people with internet, right?
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
one of the big things is, storing your policy information in a folder on your Gmail account where you can access it from anywhere so that when you need to make the claim, you can make it from Ohio. Another, that we actually heard from Glenn when we did the homeowner segment that was really pretty smart was, a lot of times data bandwidth comes way down.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And so he said that some of his best claims on large losses, the people actually forwarded their policy documents to an out-of-state family member, and the out-of-state family member could queue the claim through the online portal because while the person could call, they didn't have enough data bandwidth on their phone and they couldn't actually get through the website and the portals. So
that's interesting.
I had not heard of that, but after hearing it, I was like,
Makes
that
sense.
makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So, timeline, let's talk non-hurricane claim and then let's talk hurricane claim. What kind of timing do you typically see in, a claim that, happens as a battery fire compared to what happens in a hurricane?
Yeah, your typical claim, not outside of hurricane season, typically the carrier is going to be back in touch with you within about 24 hours. It's a pretty quick turnaround time. I've seen claims go from, claim filed to paid out in a matter of 5 days. I would say within realistically a couple of weeks, sometimes a month, depends on the investigation as to if you're going to get a survey done on the boat, see what kind of damage occurs. But it's pretty quick on those. And then when you've got a hurricane occurs and thousands, if not tens of thousands of clients have damage to their boat, the carriers can get backlogged. I think where we saw the biggest backlog from Helene and Milton was the salvage. So you got, for example, boat is on the lift, boat comes off the lift from a hurricane, ends up in neighbor's yard across the street, upside down, and God knows where. We saw actually a couple of boats up in palm trees, which is wild. So boat, is damaged. The carrier, you file the claim with the carrier then has to call and send out their salvage company, their salver, to come get that boat off of somebody's front lawn, off of a tree, whatever it may be. And think about if you've got a canal where the boat lives in, you've got a house, and then the boat is now ended up on the pool deck or on the front yard, the salvage company has to have a crane large enough to reach from the water over to the pool deck or from the front of the house to the back of the house or across, whatever it may be. Sometimes getting that large equipment out there can take time. So many clients were waiting almost months to get a salvage out there to actually get the boat, because until the actual insurance company, takes possession of the boat, they're not going to be able to actually adjust and pay out that claim. So that was definitely one of the biggest delays, was actually salvaging and getting those boats from the damaged location to the carrier's secure yard.
Yeah. And then it has to get inspected.
Correct. Yeah.
And then carrier checks and does a coverage confirmation, right? And so they make sure, hey, did you follow your hurricane plan? And, do we have coverage on here? And here's what the deductible is. And then they typically make a decision as to this is a repair or this is a total loss. Here's your check on it.
Yeah. I mean, what I see carriers kind of follow on that is, generally speaking, about 80% of value. So you've got a $100,000 boat. That boat's going to, cost more than $80,000 to fix. A lot of the times the carrier's going to call that a constructive total loss and just say, hey, it's just not worth the while fixing it. We'll go ahead and cut you a check for the total loss and move on. But yeah, the carrier's going to make that determination of, hey, repair or replace. Saw a lot of people, even from Helene, where the carrier made that determination, said, hey, boat is a total loss. Here's your check for total loss. A lot of the clients had some sort of sentimental value in the boat. They've had that boat in their family for years. They wanted to keep the boat and just fix it and repower it. The carrier will oftentimes give you the ability to do that. You can purchase it back from them at typically a very reduced rate and keep some of that claim money still and use that to fix the boat on your own too.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I think when we're thinking hurricane claims, 30 days is fast. 60 to 90 is more realistic.
Yeah.
When
Definitely.
we're thinking non-hurricane claims, I mean, we saw a claim on a, 33-foot Onslow Bay, and it was paid in 48 hours, right? And so, it's just a matter of sheer volume. And then, to go on that hurricane claim side, then it's a matter of getting repaired. And typically where a shop would be able to start in 2 weeks, it might be 6 months. And so there's a much longer tail towards those hurricane claims. And I think the other one, just on claims in general that many don't understand, can be recoverable depreciation, right? And so, the carrier might make a low offer at first, and then once you make repairs, they actually pay more on it. And so, if you're confused on any of those, that's absolutely where, one, the adjuster is there for you, right?
Yep.
Use your adjuster as an advocate for you. And two, we as an agency are there. I think, some of the things we saw in Helene and Milton is 99% of claims go well. 1% do not, right? And that's where, we can talk to the adjuster and try to understand why it's not going well. And we saw some where it wasn't going well and the adjuster was correct. We saw others where it wasn't going well and there was more available coverage, and we were able to assist those clients. And that's really the value of an agent.
Yeah, and really understanding your coverages too. Some policies may pay depreciated value. Some policies may pay an agreed value. So if you bought the cheapest policy you could find, and then you're upset of, hey, why is my boat not being replaced with a brand new one? Well, that problem started a long time ago.
Yeah.
I'm really talking to your agent when you're in the process of buying that policy and understanding how is this policy going to react in the event of a hurricane, in the event of a total loss, because insurance can be a foreign language sometimes. It can be really hard to understand.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I know, just to use, one carrier as an example, Progressive, right? When they do an agreed value policy, the agreed value stays there unless the client calls to reduce it.
Correct.
There's another carrier with a, green lizard logo where they actually drop the value of boats every year. And so somebody bought $400,000, 4 years later, they go to file a claim. They only have $200,000 in coverage, and they say, what do? I can't get a new boat for that.
Yeah, and I've gotten many calls from those clients that say, last year my boat was insured for X, and now it's insured for Y.
Yeah.
So, yep, I see it all the time for sure. And there's even some really cool features, especially if you're buying a brand new boat. You can add some additional, it's called total loss replacement or extended replacement cost, where some of these carriers will actually pay up to 120% of what you spent on that boat to buy you a brand new boat if that boat was a total loss in the first couple of years. Some are 5, some are 10 years. And definitely something to talk about with your agent if you're buying a new boat.
Yeah. And so that really became important in Hurricane Ian, right? Because, 2020 boat prices were very different than 2022 boat prices. Yeah. And so even that 20% even left some people, exposed on it. But it basically pays for the manufacturer to rebuild that exact same boat, right? It doesn't pay for upgrades.
Correct.
But if it's, hey, I paid $150, now the same boat is $180, that would be within that 20%.
And you can go above and beyond. I remember a story of a client who had a boat that was about a year and a half old that was totaled from Helene, had that total loss replacement, that 120% extended replacement cost, went back to the manufacturer and said, hey, build me the exact same boat. The manufacturer said, cool, here's your bill. It's obviously a little bit more. Carrier agreed to cover it. But then the insured said, hey, actually, I wish I would have had these 3 features that I didn't have on my old boat. The client was able to add those features. He had to pay for it out of pocket. And he got a brand new boat with all these features he always wanted to add, and he was super happy. Yeah,
absolutely. So, let's kind of, pivot over to non-hurricane, right? So one of the big things where I have seen some people not understand their policies is distance to coast limitations. Let's talk about that one. What is a distance to coast limitation within that policy or navigation limit?
Yeah, a lot of your standard policies, when I say standard, typically speaking like $500,000 in whole value and below, a lot of those policies are going to limit you at 75 miles from shore, 120, 150. That different policies have different limits on them. And it's as the crow flies from the closest point of land. So let's say I live in Tampa Bay, and I run my boat 85 miles northwest I've ran obviously farther than 75 miles, which my policy may limit. But as the crow flies, I may be still within 75 miles of land of the U.S., and I would still be covered at that point. And then Bahamas coverage. Standard policy is not going to cover Bahamas. You have to actually endorse or add on that Bahamas coverage. Some of your high value boats, your triple quad engine boats that are designed for long fishing trips, long range trips, if you go with a kind of a higher tier, upper echelon type carrier, they're oftentimes not going to have a specific navigational limit. They'll just exclude, you can't go to Mexico, you can't go to Bahamas and Turk without obviously letting us know first and adding that coverage on.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've seen quite a few that, came to us as, renewal reshops or as denied claims. And they've come to us and, they've got a quad engine boat and it's got a 75-mile limit and they're taking the boat 125 miles offshore.
Yep.
And if it sinks, there is no coverage on that.
No coverage at all. Yeah, that and the named operator provisions too.
Yeah,
that's a really important one, especially as you look at a triple or quad engine boat. Some carriers will put what's called a named operator provision or warranty on it that says, hey, if somebody's operating that boat, driving that boat, we need to know who they are and have a resume on file and approve it. And so we've seen claims where people, unauthorized operators are driving the boat and there's a claim and that's not going to be covered. Yeah.
It can get dicey out there.
For sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else that you think somebody needs to know, about boat insurance?
So they need to call us. It's something that we live and breathe every day. I'm a boat owner myself, and it's something that I have a passion for, being out there on the water. And it's something that I can really understand and help those clients with. And so really just calling us and talking to us, we love to talk about boats. It's all I do all day. It's a great job, actually. So if you want to call, talk about your boat and see how we can cover it, we'd love to chat.
Yeah, and I think it's really all about, our role is to help somebody find value, right? And value has that different definition for every customer, right? For some, it's high deductibles and low premiums. For others, it's how much coverage can I buy and I don't care what it costs, right? And so it's
different buyers.
Right. And really, I think that's something that your team does an excellent job of, is presenting options and being able to work through it with somebody to be able to find that.
I have so many calls with a client calling in, or even a dealership or lender calling in. Hey, I have this client. I'm buying this boat XYZ. What is this going to cost to insure? And I tip it, whatever you want it to cost.
Yeah.
We can tweak the policy. I can give you a $1,000 or a $10,000 policy. It's a matter of how the policy reacts. And so, a lot of clients may just buy the cheapest policy they can find first, one that comes through, and they don't understand how that policy is actually going to react. Don't be fooled by a cheaper rate and think that policy is actually going to cover you the way you want it to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely some great information on here. So appreciate the time tonight. And, if anybody needs anything, HH Insurance, we can be reached at 727-498-5551.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for having me, Jake.
Thanks, Landon.